We're now here on the top of Daf Tzadi Aleph Amid Beis, and we're up to the top line Gufa. Gufa, we go back to what we saw in the Brisa. Isha b'Pesach Rishon, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Shochten Oleo b'fnei Atzma, or as we corrected it, b'fnei Atzman. We can check the Korban Pesach Rishon on behalf of a woman or a group of women. Ubisheni, as far as Korban Pesach Sheni is concerned, we're not going to shecht a Korban Pesach Sheni on behalf of a woman, but rather Otzim Osat Fela Lacherim. If there are others who are included in the Karban, then we can bring a Pesach Sheni with her involved. Because she's not obligated in Pesach Sheni, she can have a Pesach Sheni. And even in the event that she did not bring the Pesach Rishon, she's not obligated in Pesach Sheni, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, although she has a rishus, she has the green light, and she has license and permission to bring a Pesach Sheni, but we can't bring a Pesach Sheni on behalf of a woman alone because she's not obligated in Pesach Sheni. She can be part of a chabura, which includes those who are chayav in Pesach Sheni. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Isha b'sheni shoktem oleh b'fnei atzma. According to Rabbi Yossi, to the same extent that a woman has an obligation to bring Pesach Rishon, Ein Tzarich Lo B'Rishon, we can bring a Korban Pesach on behalf of a woman alone. That's the entire shechita is done on behalf of a woman. Even in the case of Pesach Sheni, we can bring the Pesach Sheni on behalf of a woman, meaning Rabbi Yossi holds that a woman has a joint obligation in both Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. There's no bit of a difference between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Against Rabbi Yehuda, who says that she is not obligated in Pesach Sheni, she's a rishus with regard to Pesach Sheni. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he has a more extreme view in which he reduces the chiyuv of a woman. Isha b'rishon also satfeilacher. She has a rishus status. She can join others, but she cannot be the only member of the chabura for which we'll bring the Korban Pesach. She doesn't have even a rishus as far as Pesach Sheni is concerned. She is not even obligated in Pesach Rishon, but will allow her b'rishus, not as a chova, but as a rishus, to join a chabur of Pesach Rishon, but not Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is like one darga less, and it doesn't even generate a kiyum or a rishus for a woman to bring Pesach Sheni. And what Rab Shimon is saying now is that if we were to shech the Pesach Sheni on behalf of a woman plus, with others as a tzir for part of the chabura, then there would be an iser of shchita shalolim nuyav. She cannot even be manui on the Pesach Sheni. The Maika Miflagi, they're all arguing about a pasuk. How to interpret this pasuk? Rabbi Yehuda Savar, he holds that women are obligated in Pesach Rishon because in Pesach Rishon it says michsas nefashos. The word nefashos is a generic term that includes both men and women. It doesn't say b'michsas anashim, which would imply men, but rather nefashos afilu nashim. Women are obligated in Pesach Rishon. V'chi tema, if you're going to be very consistent about it, to the same extent that she's obligated in Pesach Rishon, why shouldn't she be obligated in Pesach Sheni in an event that she couldn't bring Pesach Rishon and fulfill her obligation? She should be chayavis in Pesach Sheni. And the Gemara answers the following. Siv, in regard to Pesach Sheni in Parshas Baal Lotzcha, the Torah says, Chet o yisa ha'ish hahu. Here, the Torah actually, in the context of Pesach Sheni, utilizes deliberately the word ish, and that tells you, and we'll read the whole pasuk about ish asher hu tahar u'b'derech lo chaya v'chadal asos Pesach v'nichrasa nefesh ha'im me'ameh ki karban Hashem lo ikriv b'moado chet o yisa ha'ish hahu. Now the pasuk seems to be addressing Pesach Rishon. However, the Gemara later on Daf Tzadi Gimel, according to Rebbe, is going to interpret that the second half of this pasuk is a reference to Pesach Sheni, and the word ki in this pasuk is Einon nesinas tam. It's not giving an explanation to what came first, but rather it's miloshan im. The key here is to be interpreted as im. So when it says ki karban Hashem, it's a new discussion. It's a new subject. It's davar chadash. And the pasuk basically saying two things. That number one, if someone does not bring Pesach Rishon v'nichrasa, and number two, if he didn't bring Pesach Sheni, cheto yisa ha'ishahu. Ish to the exclusion of Isha. That's how Rabbi Yehuda interprets this pasuk. And cheto yisa ishahu excludes nashim from the chiyuv, the obligation of bringing a Pesach Sheni. Ish in Isha lo. And you ask the following question, you raise the following objection: since a woman is excluded from Pesach Sheni, afilu tefela nami Sheni lo, this should be shalolim nuyaf. She's completely excluded from Pesach Sheni. How can we ever include her in the chabura? And the answer is, ahani, we use a different pasuk in the parsha of Pesach Sheni, and there the Torah says kechol chukasa Pesach Yasu also, which is an equation between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So now we have sort of a tug of war. On the one hand, she was included by virtue of nefashos in Pesach Rishon. She's obligated like a man. On the other hand, she's included for Pesach Sheni because the pasuk cheto yisa ha'ishahu ish v'lo isha. And then we have a pasuk shlishi, a kind of kasvat shlishi machriya beineim, which sets up a kind of a compromise. The Torah says that there's an equation between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. How do we reconcile that with the fact that the Torah excluded a woman from Pesach Sheni? And the answer is l'tfeila b'alma, that she could be mitzurefes, she could be integrated with others, and she could be part of the minui on the Karban Pesach, because on the Pesach Sheni, because to that extent, Pesach Sheni is to be equated with Pesach Rishon. So she has what we call a reshus, and therefore she's not shalolim nuyov. She can join the Pesach Sheni as long as there are other members of the Chabura. She's tfela bi'alma. The Gemara now asks the following question: Rabbi Yossi in this brisa said that women are obligated both in Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni. My timer. On the one hand, it says Barichon Michsas Nefashos, and the word Nefashos, as we said before in Rabbi Yehuda, is Afilu Isha. It doesn't say Anoshim, it says Nefashos. Uksiv Pesach Sheni, the Nichrasahan Nefesh Ahimea, the word Nefesh indicates that there's a chiyuv of Pesach Sheni Afilu Noshim. The word Nefesh always includes an Isha. The Ella, now you're going to ask me, but what about the pasuk in Pesach Sheni with Rabbi Yehuda that quoted before? Chet o yisaha ichahu limute mai limute katan mikares. The pasuk is saying that you need an ish. The word ish not only excludes isha, but it also excludes a katan. We're not going to use the word ish the way Rabbi Yehuda uses it, says Rabbi Yossi, to exclude an isha from the chiyuv of Pesach Sheni. She's obligated in Pesach Sheni by virtue of the pasuk of a nichritzahan nefesh. However, what are you going to do with the pasuk Yisa cheto Yisa ha'ichahu limute katan mikares? Now Tosafos says, what do you mean? You need a pasuk to exclude a katan from kares? A katan is katan from all the mitzvahs. And the Tosafos writes that ba pasuk l'mayit misha nasa gadol, if he became a gadol between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, we would now say that he's chayiv kares because now he's a gadol, and the Torah is coming to tell us that since at the time of Pesach Rishon he was a katan, he was not chayiv kares, and there was no chiyuv at all for Pesach Rishon. Therefore, as far as Pesach Sheni is concerned, even though now he's a gadol for Pesach Sheni, his birthday was somewhere between Yudalid B'Nisan and Yudalid B'Iyar. He is parted from kares vis-a-vis Pesach Sheni, because only someone who would be chayiv kares for Pesach Rishon is chayiv kares for Pesach Sheni. Now we're up to the third shita in the brisa, Rabbi Shimon. What's the logic of Rabbi Shimon that women are excluded completely from Pesach Sheni, even though in Pesach Rishon at least they could join others in the Chabur and Vimonui? Dichsiv, Rabbi Shimon builds his case on the following drasha. But Rishon in the first Pesach, it says ish, and the Torah says ish to the exclusion of isha. Ish in, isha lo. That's with regard to the Pesach Rishon. A woman is excluded. V'chitema, it would be shalom nuyav if she's completely excluded from Pesach Rishon. Ahanile, but now we have the pasuk of mechsas nifashos, and nifashos we said always includes nashim. Lit tfela, to teach us that she can be part of the chabura. V'chitema, if you'll say, well, once she could be part of the chabura of Pesach Rishon, then by virtue of the equation between Rishon and Sheni, she should be part tfela to Pesach Sheni. Why do you exclude her from Pesach Sheni? Afilu b'Sheni nami, let her be mitzurefes to others. V'eit rachmana v'Pesach Sheni d'chsiv cheto yisah ha'ish. Here he has the same drasha as Rabbi Yehuda, that the pasuk ish in Pesach Sheni is coming to exclude isha. Ish in, isha lo. And how do we know that when the Torah with the word ish is coming to exclude her from Pesach Sheni? If the Torah is saying that she's excluded from Pesach Sheni, then maybe it's only saying that she's excluded from the chiyuv of Pesach Sheni, but she certainly has a reshus like she has in the Rishon to be part of a chabura and be mitzurefes with acherim. Hashta b'Rishon lo b'Sheni miboy. In the case of a Rishon, she's not obligated. Certainly, is there any need for the Torah to exclude her from a chiyuv of Pesach Sheni? So why did the Torah use the term Yisa Ha'ish in the context of Pesach Sheni to exclude an Isha? If you're telling me she's only excluded from the chiyuv, but she could be mitzuraf and she has a reshus in Pesach Sheni, the Torah didn't have to tell us that because you've already excluded her from Pesach Rishon as far as the chiyuv is concerned. Certainly in Pesach Sheni she's excluded from the chiyuv. So why did the Torah add a miyut in Pesach Sheni? Elalav, it must be by process of elimination, tfela, that even in the case of tfela, when she wants to be mitzurefes with acherim, we will not shech the korban Pesach Sheni on her behalf. In the case of Pesach Rishon, so we have the exclusion of ish, and that means that she's not obligated in Pesach Rishon. However, she can become tfela because of the pasuk b'mechsas nefashos. Now, why did the Torah repeat an exclusion of mute in the case of Pesach Sheni in the pasuk of cheto yisa ha'ish? It cannot be. It's impossible. The Torah is coming to exclude her from a chiyuv. She's already been excluded from a chiyuv in Pesach Rishon by virtue of the pasuk ish. It must be excluding her even as a tefela. She is completely excluded. She's a non-entity as far as Pesach Sheni is concerned. Now the Gemara tries to clarify the word ish, from which Rabbi Shimon derives that women are not obligated in Pesach Rishon. Umay ish, where is this pasuk ish? Dika Amar Rabbi Shimon, and from that pasuk he derives that women are not chayev in Pesach Rishon. Nema, if you're going to tell me in Parshas Bo, it says v'chula hem ish sel beis avos, and the word ish is excluding an isha. No. We need that word ish for something else. Ahu mi boile. What do we do with the word ish in that pasuk? Rabbi Yitzchak. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says ish zocha v'ein katan zocha. Rabbi Yitzchak derives from this pasuk that one person can be zocha in a korban Pesach on behalf of others. He makes a kinyan on their behalf, or he receives a gift on their behalf. And the pasuk says that ish, a man, could be kona, he can make an acquisition on a lamb on behalf of his whole family. And the word ish is telling me that this mechanism by which one person could be zocha in the korban Pesach on behalf of others, it's only an ish that's zocha lacher, but ein katan zocha lacher. The Gemara now continues to clarify the pasuk of Ish, from which Rabbi Shimon derives the drasha that Isha is not obligated in Korban Pesach. Now, back on Daf Tzadi Aleph Amud Aleph, we recorded a machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, whether we shecht a Korban Pesach for a yachid, for one individual. Rabbi Yehuda darshaned a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. It says, "Lo suchal lizboach es hapasach biachad sharech." And the extra word bachad is to teach us that we don't shecht the Pesach for a yachid. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi darshans from that pasuk that it says ish lefi ochlo, that we will shecht a Korban Pesach for a yachid. The Gemara there had clarified that Rabbi Yossi holds that the pasuk lo suchal litvach es ha-pasuk is coming to teach us about the Isur Losas at the Shech Pesach in a Bamas Yachid during the time of the Isur of Bamos. The Ella says the Gemara, if we're going to assume that Rabbi Shimon needs the word Ish, like Rabbi Yitzchak did in the pasuk of Bikhu Lahem each celebrate Shabbos, and only in each could be Zochal Acherim, let's offer a different possibility. The pasuk says, Ish lefi achlo tachusu al haseh. And that pasuk is coming to exclude women from the chiyuv of Korban Pesach. We're talking about Pesach Rishon. He says, no, I need that pasuk Ish lefi achlo ha de Rabbi Yossi. We already clarified that the halacha of Rabbi Yossi, that you can check the Korban Pesach even for Yachid, is going to be derived from the pasuk Ish lefi achla. Savarla ki Rabbi Shimon, and now we have the word bi'echad, and we're going to dash in from the word bi'echad the Isur Bama during the time of Isur Bamos, and we're going to derive that Rabbi Shimon Nami Savar ki Rabbi Yossi, that we check the Korban Pesach on a Yachid, and therefore if he didn't agree to that, he should dash in the pasuk bi'echad like Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't check the Korban Pesach for a Yachid. And we know that Rabbi Shimon accepts the principle of Rabbi Yossi that we check the Korban Pesach on a Yachid. So obviously, we're not going to use the pasuk Ish lefi achlo to exclude the possibility, or I should say the word echad, to exclude the possibility of bringing the Korban Pesach for a Yachid. We're going to use the word echad like Rabbi Yossi does to teach us the Isur Lav of Shchitas HaPesach Bisman Isur Bamos on a Bama. Ve'hahu, and that pasuk of Ish lefi achlo, mi boile, Rabbi Shimon needs it to derive the conclusion that Shoftenes HaPesach al Yachid. He cannot use it, therefore, to exclude the obligation of a woman to bring the Korban Pesach Rishon. So now we're in a bind, in a sense. We don't have a source from Shimon to exclude women from the Korban Pesach, because if we go back to the pasuk of the Yikhu Lahem Ish Celebei Savos, we need that pasuk for each Zocha and Katan Zocha. And if you're going to talk about the pasuk of each Lefi Achlo, we need that pasuk as Rabbi Yossi used it to teach you that you could bring the Korban Pesach even for a Yachid against Rabbi Yehuda. And if you're talking about the pasuk of Echad, we're going to use the pasuk Echad as Rabbi Yossi did for Shchitas, the Isur Lav of Shchitas HaPesach Bisman Bama. So now the Gemara says that even Rab Shimon is going to darshan each lefi achlo, like Rab Yossi, that you can check the Korban Pesach for a Yachid. And he's going to derive a second conclusion from that pasuk of Ish lefi achlo, that Ish velo Isha. Amalecha, Rab Shimon is going to tell you, if you're going to tell me that the pasuk Ish lefi achlo is only coming to teach you that you can bring the Korban Pesach on a Yachid, like we saw in Rabbi Yossi, Niftav Rachmana, the Torah said lefi achlo in the singular. Umay Ish. Why does it say Why does the Torah add the word ish? It could have just said lefi achlo and dropped the word each. The word each is totally redundant. Shema mina tarte. Therefore, we derive two things from this passage. Number one, that we can check the Korban Pesach for a Yochid, as Rabbi Yossi says, and number two, an ish and only an ish is chayav in Pesach, not an isha. Now the Gemara has a study of the Shita of Rabbi Loza. The Gemara says, "Kiman azla had the Amar Rabbi Loza." Which Shita of the three Shitas of the Tanoim is reflected in the Psak, the ruling of Rabbi Loza? Rabbi Loza says, "Isha b'rishon chova." She's obligated in the first Pesach. That could not possibly be the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Ubesheni rishus. And with regard to the second Karban, she is a rishus. Sounds very simple. This is Rabbi Yehuda Shita, exactly. But Rabbi Loza adds vidocha es hashabbos. Now, before the Gemara is going to answer your original question, namely Kiman Ozla, the Gemara takes a little bit of a digression. And the Gemara says, I rishus amai dochas hashabbos. If you're telling me that a woman's status with regard to Pesach Sheni is only that of Rishus, why should the Korban Pesach in Pesach Sheni on behalf of a woman override Shabbos? Ela Ema, we're going to have to sort of rewrite the text of Rabbi Elazar. Basheni Rishus, Rishon Chova, V'doches HaShabbos. First put the Sheni and then put the Rishon. If you change the order, the sequence, then it makes sense that Doches HaShabbos is referring to the first Korban Pesach, which is a Chova. But Einechinami, as far as the second Korban Pesach, which is only Rishus, it would not override the Shabbos. Anyway, the Gemara finally finishes up the discussion. You asked me, Kiman Azla, Kiman Ki Rabbi Yehuda. The first Pesach, a woman is obligated. In the second Pesach, she's only a Rishus. Omar Rav Yaakov, Omar Rav Yochanan, Ein Osim Chabura Shekula Gerim. We will not set up a Chabura for the Korban Pesach that's made up exclusively of Gerim. Why not? And the answer is Shema. Since they're not B'nai Bris, they don't really know the halachas that well. Yidaktiku bo v'yiviu lidei psul. They'll be overly careful and be machmir yosemidai, and they may come to pasel the karma. Now, let's try to see if we can get a little bit of an insight here as to why we're excluding a chabura that's made up entirely of gerim. And he says the following. He says, they scrutinize the offering too closely, the avili de psul, and they might unnecessarily invalidate the karban. Now, Tosas already writes that, although it's implied in this Gemara, that gerim are generally overly stringent in performance of mitzvahs, usually you'll find elsewhere in the Gemara that gerim are less careful than those who are born Jewish in mitzvah performance. And the Yerushalmi attributes the barring of a group formed entirely exclusively of gerim to the laxity of mitzvahs, which might cause them to inadvertently invalidate the Korban Pesach. Now the Gemara goes back to discuss the obligation of women with regard to Korban Pesach and brings up an additional brisa quoting Reb Shimon with regard to Noshim that are not obligated in the first Pesach. Tana Rabban, we learned in the brisa, Pesach umatzah umarar b'leil rishon chova. As far as the first night of Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, there is a trifold chiyuv of Pesach, matzah, umar. Mikan v'elech, rishus. And the day of the 15th and the balance of Pesach, there's no obligation. As far as matzah umar is concerned, it's only a rishus. Rav Shimon omer ba'anoshim chova u'ba'anoshim rishus. What is that going about? How could there be a chiyuv of anoshim and noshim is rishus? Ahei koi. In reference to what did this brisa establish that in the balance of Pesach there's a rishus? Ilema Pesach. That's impossible. Pesach kol shiva mi'ika. Is there a korban Pesach beyond the first night? The Torah says Yochel Sabosam Laila Zeh Ela Matzumar. Maybe what's being said over here in this brisa by Reb Shimon is that there is such a thing, not by Reb Shimon, I mean by the Tanakh of Reb Shimon, is that the rest of the balance of Pesach, it's Rishus, to eat matzah and morah. Wait a second, Amos Sefer, now let's read Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon over by Noshim Chova by Noshim Rishus. Now, if you're talking about matzah and morah for the balance of Pesach, and that is where Reb Shimon says that there's a chova to eat matzah and morah in the balance of Pesach, even though the first night is universally accepted, even the Tanakh holds it's a chova, says Reb Shimon, that's only as far as men is concerned. But as far as women is concerned, it's a rishus. And that's what the Sefer is talking about. Noshim are not obligated in matzah umara. It's not an obligation. That's the way we're going to have to interpret Reb Shimon here. If you assume that we're talking about matzah and morar as a chiyuv for noshim, a chiyuv for noshim and a rishus for noshim, and we're including here the first night. Well, what kind of rishus for noshim? The less later of Shimon Hadar, the Omer Abelazar, this we had a whole sugi. If you remember back earlier in Pesachim, it says noshim chayovas b'achilus matzah v'ator shenemar lo sochal olav chometz shivas yom tochal of matzahs kol sheyechno v'val tochal chometz yeshno bekum echol matzah v'ani noshim hol v'yeshnom v'val tochal chometz yeshno bekum echol matzah. Women are equated to men in the mitzvah of achilus matzah by virtue of the equation between chametz and between the Isur chametz and the mitzvah of eating matzah. Women are included in the Isur chametz, like they're included in all Isurim in the Torah, and therefore, ipso facto, they're included in the mitzvah of eating matzah. Ela ema, the only way we can interpret this brisa is Pesach matzah umar barishon chova, mikan v'elech rishus, that the Pesach, the matzah, and the morah in the first round, meaning on the first night of Pesach, is a chova. From now on, matzah and morah is only rishus. Reb Shimon Omer Pesach ba'noshim chova, and ba'noshim rishus. And this is the sheet of Reb Shimon that we saw at the beginning, that Reb Shimon holds that the Pesach is only a chova, Pesach region for an ish. Women are excluded. They only have the status of a rishus. And that brings us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Tzadi Aleph Amud Beis.